For 33 years, I was content being the quiet extra in the glittering Sanchez family production. I lived in Marrowgate and let my sister Serena handle the spotlight. That ended the morning the probate attorney read the will. I expected a token remembrance, but instead I inherited a war. Serena looked at me with cold, perfect hatred, and I knew right then that she would burn everything down before she let me keep a single dime. The rain in Marrowgate was different from the rain in the city. Here, it felt like a heavy, wet blanket that muffled the world, turning the streets into gray ribbons of silence. I liked the silence. I had spent 33 years curating a life that was quiet, orderly, and entirely my own. My apartment was small. My job at the municipal archives was predictable, and my bank account was modest but stable. I was Alice Sanchez, the invisible daughter, the footnote in the biography of a great man. I preferred it that way. When my phone rang at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, I knew before I answered that my piece was over. The number was local to the city, a specific area code that reeked of steel towers and expensive retainers. It was Halston and Price Legal Group. My father, Victor Sanchez, was dead. The news did not shatter me. Grief is complicated when your relationship with the deceased was defined by distance. I felt a dull ache, a sense of finality, but not the weeping devastation that would surely be captured by the cameras that followed my sister. Serena was the grief the public wanted. She was the heiress, the philanthropist, the beautiful face of the Sanchez legacy. I was just Alice. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and polite nods. I stood in the back. I spoke to no one. Serena was at the front, flanked by board members and politicians, looking like a tragic queen. We did not speak. We had not spoken in 3 years. 2 days later, I sat in the conference room of Halston and Price. The table was a slab of mahogany long enough to land a small aircraft on. The windows looked out over the skyline, a view that cost more per hour than I made in a month. Serena was already there. She sat on the opposite side of the table, her posture rigid, her hands folded on the polished wood. She wore a black dress that fit her perfectly, tailored to show respect without sacrificing dominance. Her dark hair was pulled back, exposing a face that was sharp, beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You are late," Serena said. Her voice was low. She did not look at me. She looked at the empty leather chair at the head of the table where our father would have sat. "It is 9 o'clock exactly," I said. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. My coat was wet from the rain. I saw her eyes flick to the damp fabric, registering the imperfection with a microscopic flinch. The door opened and a man walked in. He was older, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my car. This was Arthur Price. He carried a thick leather portfolio. "Good morning," Arthur said. His voice was professional, stripped of any real sympathy. He sat at the head of the table and placed the portfolio down. "I know this is a difficult time for both of you. Victor was a man of specific intentions. We are here to execute those intentions." Serena nodded once. "Let us get this over with." "Arthur, I have a board meeting at 2. I said nothing. I just wanted to leave. I expected a check, maybe $50,000, maybe $100, enough to pay off my mortgage in Marrowgate and disappear back into my gray, quiet life. Serena would get the empire. That was how the world worked. Arthur opened the portfolio. He began to read. The legal language was dense, a thicket of clauses and definitions. I let it wash over me, staring at the rain streaking against the glass. "To my daughter, Serena Sanchez," he read, "I leave the townhouse on 5th Avenue, the collection of artwork currently housed in the gallery vault, and the liquid assets in the primary checking accounts, totaling $4 million. Serena did not blink. This was expected. This was maintenance money for her lifestyle. I waited for my name. I waited for the dismissal. "And to my daughter, Alice Sanchez." Arthur continued. I shifted in my chair. "I leave the entirety of my interest in Sable Ridge Holdings, including all subsidiary assets and controlling shares. I also leave the property known as the Blackwood Lake House and the residual contents of my private safe deposit box at First City Bank." The silence that followed was absolute. It sucked the air out of the room. Serena turned her head slowly. She looked at Arthur, then she looked at me. Her expression had not changed, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Read that again," Serena said. Arthur cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable. "The will states that Alice Sanchez is the primary beneficiary of the holding entity Sable Ridge and the Lake House." Serena laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. "That is a mistake. Sable Ridge holds the portfolio. It holds the family trust structure. Dad would never give that to her. She does not know a stock option from a grocery coupon. It is not a mistake, Serena," Arthur said softly. "I drafted this revision myself 6 months ago." Victor was clear. Serena stood up, her hands pressed flat against the mahogany. 6 months ago? She looked at me now, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure it felt like physical contact. "You were seeing him." I shook my head. "No, I have not seen him since Christmas 3 years ago." "You are lying," Serena said. Her voice remained controlled, but there was a tremor of violence underneath it. "You went to him. You played the poor, neglected daughter card. You cried about your sad little life in Marrowgate, and you manipulated a sick old man into changing his will. I did not move. I learned a long time ago that reacting to Serena only fed her. I did not ask for this." "Serena, do not lie to me," she snapped. "This is millions of dollars in assets. This is the control of the family legacy. You think I'm going to let you walk out of here with it? You think I'm going to let you ruin everything he built?" Arthur raised a hand. "Serena, please, sit down." "I will not sit down," she said. "This will is invalid. He was on medication. He was confused. Alice took advantage of him. There is a clause you need to be aware of," Arthur said. His voice cut through her anger. "Victor included a challenge trigger." Serena froze. "A what?" "A no-contest clause with a specific trigger condition." Arthur explained. "If any beneficiary challenges the validity of this will, the assets in question do not revert to the estate. They move immediately into a temporary trust lock controlled by a neutral third party until the matter is adjudicated by a federal court. Not a probate judge. It effectively freezes the assets for years." Serena stared at him. "He traps the money if I fight?" He wanted to ensure the transition was smooth. Arthur said. Serena looked at me. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had broken into her house. "You did this," she whispered. "You poisoned him against me." I stood up. I felt sick. My hands were shaking, so I put them in my pockets. "I did not do anything. Serena, I did not know about any of this. I do not believe you," she said. "And I promise you, Alice, you will not keep it. I will bury you in legal fees. I will drag your name through every gutter in this city. I will make you wish you had never been born." "That is enough," Arthur said sharply. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished wood toward me. "Alice, this is for you." Victor left a letter. I reached out and took the envelope. It felt heavy. Serena watched the envelope pass into my hands. Her eyes narrowed. "What is in there?" "That is private," Arthur said. Serena grabbed her purse. She did not look at Arthur. She looked only at me. "Enjoy it while you can." "Alice," she said, "you have no idea what you have walked into." She turned and walked out of the room. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. I looked at Arthur. "Why did he do this?" I asked. Arthur sighed. He looked tired. Victor was a complex man. "Alice, he made choices. Now you have to live with them." I drove back to Marrowgate in a daze. The rain had stopped, leaving the sky a bruised purple. I did not go home. I went to the small park near the river, the one where no one went after dark. I sat in my car with the engine running and the heat blasting. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper. My father's handwriting was jagged, the letters pressed hard into the page. "My dearest Alice, I am sorry. That is the first thing I need to say. I am sorry for the distance. I am sorry for the silence. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you away from this life. but I see now that I only left you unprotected in a different way. I have made a mess of things. Alice, there are things in this family, things in my business, that are not what they seem. Serena is too much like me. She sees the profit but not the cost. You were always the one who looked at the ground and saw the cracks. I am making you pay for my choices. And for that, I will never forgive myself. But you are the only one I trust to do what comes next. Do not sell the shares. Do not sell the lake house. Not yet. There is a storm coming. Serena will fight you. Let her fight. But watch the shadows. Trust the person who arrives with proof, not charm. When the truth comes, it will not be polite. I love you, my quiet girl. Dad. I read the letter 3 times. Trust the person who arrives with proof, not charm. It sounded like something from a spy novel, not a letter from a man who made his fortune in logistics and commercial real estate. I went home to my apartment. It felt different now. The walls felt thinner. The quiet felt less like peace and more like waiting. The war started 3 days later. I was at work, organizing a stack of municipal zoning records from the 1950s. When my phone buzzed, it was a notification from a news app. Sanchez Dynasty in Chaos. Unknown daughter grabs millions. I clicked the link. The photo was unflattering. A grainy shot of me walking into the law firm, my head down, my coat wet. The headline was brutal. Sources close to the late Victor Sanchez claim his estranged daughter, Alice Sanchez, manipulated the ailing tycoon in his final months, forcing a last-minute change to his will that cuts out his longtime business partner and devoted daughter, Serena Sanchez. I felt the blood drain from my face. Devoted daughter. Serena had visited him maybe once a month for photo opportunities. I scrolled down. The article was on a popular local business blog, but it had already been picked up by the tabloids. They called me the Marrowgate Mystery. They speculated about my mental health. They claimed I had debts. They claimed I had a history of instability. It was all lies, but it was well-written lies. My phone rang. It was Arthur Price. Alice. He said, "We have a problem." She filed. I said, "She filed this morning." Arthur confirmed. She is contesting the will on the grounds of undue influence and lack of capacity. She has affidavits from 2 of Victor's nurses claiming he was confused and that you were calling him incessantly. I never called him. I said, "You can check the phone records. It does not matter what is true." Alice, Arthur said, "It matters what they can argue in court. But there is something else. Serena has requested an emergency injunction to freeze your access to the lake house." "Why the lake house?" I asked. "It is just an old cabin." "It is not just a cabin." "Alice, it is where Victor kept his personal archives. Serena wants to control the narrative. If she gets in there, she controls the history." I felt a spark of anger then. It was small, but it was hot. "Stop her," I said. "I am trying." Arthur said, "But I have to warn you. I cannot represent you in the contest. I am the executor. I have to remain neutral. You need your own counsel. And you need someone who is not afraid of Serena Sanchez." I hung up. I sat at my desk and looked at the zoning records. They seemed so trivial now. I went home early. I needed to think. I needed to understand what my father had done. I opened my laptop and started searching. I looked for Victor Sanchez. I looked for Sable Ridge Holdings. The information was sparse. A few press releases, a few quarterly reports. Then I looked for North Pine Community Foundation. My father had been the chairman of the board for 20 years. They were a massive philanthropic organization. They built hospitals. They funded schools. Serena was on the advisory council. I dug deeper. I found a recent article, buried in the back pages of a legal journal. Victor Sanchez steps down from North Pine Board, citing health reasons. The date was 2 weeks before he changed his will. I found another notice. Halston and Price appointed as new legal representation for Victor Sanchez. He had fired his old lawyers the same week he quit the foundation. Why? Why would a man who spent his life building a reputation as a philanthropist suddenly cut ties with his own charity and change his legal team right before he died? And why give the holding company to me? I was not a businesswoman. I was an archivist. I organized things. I looked for patterns in paper. Wait, I looked for patterns. My father knew exactly what I was. He did not leave the company to me because he thought I could run it. He left it to me because he thought I could read it. I stood up and paced my small living room. The air felt charged. Serena was not just angry about the money. She was scared. She had reacted with too much force, too quickly. She was trying to bury me before I could even look inside the box. A knock at the door made me jump. It was 9 at night. No one visited me at 9 at night. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I hesitated, then unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. There was no one there. The hallway was silent, smelling of floor wax and old dust, but on the welcome mat, sitting squarely in the center, was a plain white envelope. I looked left, then right. The stairwell door was closed. I stepped out and picked up the envelope. It was light. There was no name on it, no stamp. I stepped back inside and locked the door. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single index card. It had been typed on a typewriter. The ink slightly uneven. Superior Court, Department 402, Tuesday, 9 a.m. That was it. No signature, no explanation. I turned the card over. It was blank. Department 402. That was probate court. Tuesday was the day of the first hearing for the will contest. Someone knew I would be there. Someone was watching. Trust the person who arrives with proof. Not charm. I looked at the card again. This was not charm. This was data. Cold, hard data. I went to the window and looked down at the street. A black sedan was parked under the streetlight 3 stories down. The windows were tinted dark. As I watched, the engine turned over, the exhaust puffing white in the cool air, and the car pulled slowly away from the curb, disappearing into the Marrowgate night. I shivered. Serena wanted a war. She wanted to crush her quiet little sister and take back the kingdom. She thought I was weak. She thought I was just an extra in her story. I looked at the card in my hand. I walked into the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I was not going to sleep tonight. If my father wanted me to find the truth, I would find it. I would not sign an NDA. I would not take a settlement. I would go to Department 402 on Tuesday, and I would see who else showed up. I was Alice Sanchez. I was invisible. And for the first time in my life, I realized that being invisible was not a weakness. It was a tactical advantage. I sat down at my kitchen table, placed the index card next to my father's letter, and began to write a list of everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. The first item on the list was simple. Who is afraid of the truth? I wrote Serena's name. Then, after a pause, I wrote North Pine Community Foundation. Then I waited for the morning of the hearing. The courthouse steps were a zoo. I saw the news vans from a block away. They were hungry. The narrative had already been set. The greedy, estranged daughter versus the grieving, loyal sister. I parked my car in the public garage 3 blocks away and walked. I wore a gray suit, simple, nondescript. I pulled my hair back. I wore no makeup. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. Boring. I bypassed the main entrance where the reporters were clustered and found the side door, the one usually used by clerks and staff. I had my employee ID from the archives. It was a government badge, enough to make the security guard glance and wave me through the metal detector without asking questions. I made it to the 4th floor without being stopped. The hallway outside Department 402 was crowded. Lawyers in expensive suits huddled in small groups, whispering. I saw Serena immediately. She was standing near the double doors, surrounded by 3 men. One of them I recognized from the news. Marcus Thorne, a litigator known for destroying opponents so thoroughly they usually left the state. Serena looked impeccable. She wore a dark navy dress, a single strand of pearls, and an expression of brave suffering. She saw me. She broke away from her lawyers and walked toward me. The heels of her shoes clicked sharply on the linoleum. The hallway went quiet. People turned to watch. "You came," she said. "I told you I would." I said, "You look tired." "Alice," she said. Her voice was loud enough for people to hear. "This is too much for you. You do not have to do this. We can end this right now. Just sign the papers. I will take care of you." I looked at her. I saw the tightness around her eyes. She was acting. "I am not signing anything." "Serena." She stepped closer. The mask slipped just a fraction. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You are making a mistake. You are going to lose everything. And when you do not come crawling to me. I am not the one who is afraid." "Serena," I said quietly. She recoiled slightly, as if I had slapped her. "We will see about that," she hissed. She turned and walked back to her lawyers. Marcus Thorne glanced at me, a dismissive sneer on his face, and then they pushed through the doors into the courtroom. I took a breath. I checked my watch. It was 8:55. I looked around the hallway. I was looking for someone. The person who left the card. There were plenty of people, clerks, other lawyers, a few curious onlookers, but no one approached me. No one made eye contact. I gripped the strap of my bag. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was a trap. I walked toward the doors. As I reached for the handle, I felt a presence beside me. I turned. A woman was standing there. She was older, maybe 60, wearing a beige trench coat and holding a folding umbrella. She looked like a librarian or a retired school teacher. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was mild. "Yes?" I said. She didn't look at me. She looked straight ahead at the doors. "Don't let them seal the addendum," she said. "What?" "The addendum to the will," she said, speaking quickly and quietly. "Serena's team will move to seal it under the guise of family privacy. If the judge seals it, you will never see the conditional instruction." "Object, who are you?" I asked. She turned to me then. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and frightened. "I am nobody," she said. "Just someone who remembers when Victor was a decent man." She shoved a piece of paper into my hand and walked away, disappearing down the crowded hallway before I could say another word. I looked at the paper. It was a photocopy of a legal citation, Probate Code Section 8802, Disclosure of Testamentary Instruments. I looked back at the doors. Trust the person who arrives with proof. She had given me a weapon. I opened the door and walked into the courtroom. The air inside was cool and smelled of furniture polish. I walked to the table on the left, the respondent's table. I was alone. I had no lawyer. I had not had time to find one who would take the case on such short notice against Serena Sanchez. The judge entered, Judge Holloway. He was a stern man with a face like a carved rock. He looked at the packed courtroom. He looked at Serena's team of 4 lawyers. Then he looked at me, sitting alone. "Ms. Sanchez," the judge said, "do you have counsel?" "No, Your Honor." I said, "I am representing myself for this hearing." Serena's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, stood up. He smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Your Honor," he said, "given the respondent's lack of representation and the complexity of the estate, we have a preliminary motion to streamline the proceedings. We move to seal the testamentary addendum referenced in the filing, to protect the privacy of the family and the dignity of the deceased." He sat down, confident. It was a standard motion. It sounded reasonable. Judge Holloway looked at me. "Ms. Sanchez, do you have an objection?" I stood up. My knees were shaking. I held the crumpled photocopy in my hand. "Yes, Your Honor." I said, "I object." The judge raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" I looked at the paper. I looked at Serena. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, on the grounds of transparency. "Your Honor," I said, "my father's will is the central document of this dispute. Sealing any part of it denies me the ability to understand the inheritance I am defending, and—" I cited the code number the woman had given me. The judge paused. He looked at Thorne. He looked at me. "The objection is sustained." The judge said, "The addendum will remain part of the open record." Thorne stiffened. Serena's hand clenched into a fist on the table. "Thank you, Your Honor." I said. I sat down. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. I had won the first skirmish. But as the hearing continued, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I turned around and looked at the gallery behind me, in the back row, near the door. A man was sitting. He was wearing a black suit. He was not looking at the judge. He was not looking at Serena. He was looking directly at me. He did not smile. He did not nod. He just watched. His face a mask of absolute calm. And then, as our eyes met, he raised one hand and tapped his watch. Time. I turned back to the front. The war had officially begun, and I was no longer just the quiet extra. I was the target. And I was ready. The adrenaline from the courtroom faded by the time I reached the parking garage, replaced by a cold, creeping realization of what I had just done. I had stood up. I had spoken. I had drawn a line in the sand against the Sanchez machine, and now, as I sat in my Honda Civic listening to the engine idle, I knew I was woefully outgunned. I needed a general. I did not go to the high-rise firms in the city center. I could not afford them. And I did not trust them. They all swam in the same pool as my sister's team. Instead, I drove back toward Marrowgate, to a brick building near the train station that housed a small firm called Klein & Associates. Diana Klein was recommended to me by the head librarian at the archives. She was described as thorough, unglamorous, and chemically incapable of being intimidated. Diana was in her 50s, with short gray hair and glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. Her office smelled of coffee and printer toner. It was messy in a way that suggested frantic productivity, piles of files leaning against the walls like sedimentary rock formations. She listened to me for 40 minutes without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen scratching aggressively against the paper. When I finished explaining the will, the contest, and the scene in Department 402, she finally looked up. "You realize this is not a probate case," she said. I blinked. "What do you mean?" Diana tapped her pen on the desk. "This is a corporate hostile takeover disguised as a family dispute. I looked up the filings Serena made this morning. She has 3 partners from Vance and Sterling on the signature line. That is a mergers and acquisitions firm. Alice, they do not handle wills. They handle dismantling companies. Why would she need them?" I asked. "Because she is not just trying to get the money," Diana said. "She is trying to secure the asset before anyone looks too closely at it. She is scared of something inside that estate." She pushed a retainer agreement across the desk. "I am not cheap, but I am affordable compared to them." She said, "I will take the case, but you need to understand the rules of engagement. They are going to come at you with everything. They will paper us to death. They will try to bankrupt you with motions. They will dig through your trash. I have nothing to hide." I said, Diana smiled, but it was a grim expression. "Everyone has something, Alice, and if they cannot find it, they will invent it." I signed the paper. 2 days later, the first mortar shell landed. It came in the form of a settlement offer delivered by courier to my apartment. At the same time, my phone lit up with notifications. Serena had posted a statement on her social media channels. I opened the app first. There was a photo of Serena and our father from 10 years ago, standing on a dock at the lake house. They looked perfect, golden. "My heart is broken." The caption read, "Protecting my father's legacy means protecting him from those who sought to exploit his vulnerability in his final days. We fight not for money, but for the truth of who Victor Sanchez was. I ask for privacy as we navigate this painful family tragedy." It had 12,000 likes in an hour. I threw the phone on the couch and opened the courier packet. The contrast was nauseating. The public statement was all heart and sorrow. The legal document in my hands was cold. Hard calculation, settlement agreement, and mutual release. I read the terms. Serena was offering me $200,000. It was a lot of money for me. It could pay off my mortgage. It could buy me a new car. It could buy me safety. But then I read the conditions. Clause 14. Non-disclosure and non-disparagement. The beneficiary agrees to a lifetime ban on discussing, publishing, or otherwise disseminating any information regarding the estate, the deceased, the Sanchez family, or the business entities known as Sable Ridge Holdings. This includes a prohibition on speaking to law enforcement or regulatory bodies without a subpoena. They did not just want the money, They wanted my voice. They wanted to sew my mouth shut. I called Diana. "Do not sign it," she said before I could even say hello. "I am looking at it." I said, "It feels like a gag order." "It is a gag order," Diana said. 200,000 is an insult. Alice, the estate is valued in the tens of millions. The fact that she is offering cash up front means she is desperate to stop the discovery process. She does not want us looking at the books. I am not signing. I said, "Good," Diana said, "because I just got the initial inventory of assets. You need to come to the office." When I arrived, Diana had a whiteboard set up. She had drawn a diagram that looked like a spider web. In the center was Sable Ridge Holdings. "This is what your father left you," Diana said, pointing to the center circle. "It is a holding company. On the surface, it looks boring. It holds title to the lake house and a few commercial warehouses in the industrial district." She uncapped a red marker. "But look underneath. Sable Ridge has controlling interest in 4 other LLCs, and those LLCs have ownership stakes in a logistics firm, a medical supply distributor, and a dormant charity called the Harbor Initiative." I stared at the board. I did not know any of this. I thought he just owned real estate. "It gets weirder," Diana said. "The valuation is impossible to pin down. The subsidiaries are layered so deep that the money moves in circles. But here's the kicker. Sable Ridge has a standing automatic transfer set up. Every month, for the last 5 years, it has sent $50,000 to a vendor account listed as consulting services." "Who is the consultant?" I asked. Diana shook her head. "That is the problem. The account is anonymous, but the routing number goes to a bank in the Caymans." My stomach twisted. This was not just about inheritance. This was money laundering, or blackmail. "Serena knows," I said. "That is why she wants the company. If I get it, I see the books." "Exactly," Diana said. "And if you see the books, you might see where the bodies are buried." She turned back to her desk and picked up a file. "There is one more thing. Remember that addendum you fought to keep unsealed?" "Yes, I got a copy this morning," she said. "It is short, but it is specific." She handed me the paper. It was a single paragraph, signed by my father 3 weeks before he died. "Instruction for the disposition of Archive B, to be executed only upon the triggering of a formal contest. Access to the physical site known as Blackwood Lake House is granted to Alice Sanchez for a period of 48 hours for the purpose of inventory." Prior to any asset freeze, he knew, I whispered. He knew she would contest. "He built a back door for you," Diana said. The judge reviewed this and agreed. Because of this specific instruction, the asset freeze on the lake house does not kick in until Monday. You have the weekend. I looked at the date on the wall. It was Friday. I have to go there. I said, "You have to be careful." Diana said, "Serena's team knows about this too. They cannot stop you legally. But they will be watching. And Alice? Take a camera. Photograph everything. If it is not in the inventory, it does not exist." Before I drove to the lake, I had one more stop to make. I had spent the previous night scouring my father's old emails, the few I had access to from a shared server we used years ago for family photos. I found a name that kept popping up in the metadata of his schedule. Mara Ellison. She had been his executive assistant for 12 years. She was the gatekeeper, and then, 6 months ago, she had vanished. No LinkedIn updates, no forwarding address at the company. I found her through an old alumni newsletter from the community college in Marrowgate. She was working at a bakery 3 towns over. I drove there in the early afternoon. The bakery was warm and smelled of yeast and sugar. Mara was behind the counter, wiping down the display case. She looked older than I remembered. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed. She froze when she saw me. "Alice," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hello?" "Mara," I said. She looked around the shop. It was empty except for a couple in the corner. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I just want to talk." "Mara, about my father." She untied her apron with shaking hands. "I can't talk about business. I signed an agreement." "I am not asking about business," I said. I am asking about his state of mind. Serena says he was confused. She says he was manipulated. Mara laughed. It was a bitter, jagged sound. Confused? Victor Sanchez was sharper in his last month than most men are in their prime. He wasn't confused. Alice, he was terrified. She leaned over the counter, her voice dropping. He spent the last year trying to fix something. She said, he kept having these meetings, closed door, no minutes, just him and the board members from North Pine. The foundation? I asked. She nodded. He wanted out. He told me he was done. He said, I built the engine, but I won't drive the car anymore. But they wouldn't let him resign. Who wouldn't? The board. And others. She glanced at the window, checking the street. He kept talking about a promise. He said, a promise I can't break. Mara, I said, pressing my hands on the glass counter. What was he afraid of? She looked at me, and I saw genuine fear in her eyes. He was afraid for you. Alice, he said you were the only clean thing in his life. He said if he didn't do what they wanted, they would destroy you. Who is they? She stepped back. I have said too much. Please, go. If they see me talking to you. Who? Mara? She shook her head. Just take the money. Alice, if Serena offers you a settlement, take it. Run away. Go somewhere they can't find you. She turned and hurried into the back room, the swinging door flapping shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, the smell of bread suddenly cloying and sickening. Trust the person who arrives with proof. Mara didn't have proof. She had fear, and that was a kind of proof. 2. The drive to Blackwood Lake took 3 hours. The road wound up into the mountains, the trees closing in like a tunnel. It was raining again, a cold, sleeting rain that turned the asphalt slick. The lake house was not really a house. It was a sprawling mid-century modern structure made of glass and timber. Cantilevered over the water, it was beautiful and cold. We had spent summers here when I was a child. Before my mother died, before Serena became Serena, before the silence took over. I parked my car in the gravel drive. The house was dark. I unlocked the front door with the key Arthur Price had given me. The air inside was stale, smelling of pine needles and old wood smoke. I turned on the lights. The furniture was draped in white sheets, looking like ghosts in the gloom. I had 48 hours. I started in the study. This was my father's sanctuary. It was a wall of books and a massive oak desk. I took pictures of everything: the books on the shelves, the papers on the desk, the contents of the drawers. Most of it was mundane: old tax returns, blueprints for buildings that were never built, letters from politicians thanking him for donations. I worked for hours. The rain hammered against the glass. The house groaned in the wind. By midnight, I was exhausted. I sat on the floor of the study, surrounded by piles of paper. I had found nothing that explained the Archive B mentioned in the addendum. I looked around the room. My father was a man of secrets. He didn't hide things in safes. He hid them in plain sight. I remembered a game we used to play when I was little. He would hide a silver dollar somewhere in the room, and I would have to find it. Look for the disruption, he would say. Look for the thing that breaks the pattern. I looked at the floor. It was wide plank oak, polished to a shine. I looked at the bookshelves. They were built in, floor to ceiling. I walked over to the corner, near the window. The rug here was slightly askew. I pulled it back. The floorboards looked normal. I knelt down and ran my hand over the wood. There was a draft, a tiny, cold breath of air coming from between 2 planks. I pushed on the board. It moved. It wasn't nailed down. It was on a spring latch. I pressed harder, and the board popped up. My heart hammered in my throat. I reached into the dark space between the joists. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a gray metal lockbox, the kind you buy at an office supply store. It was heavy. It was locked. Of course, I didn't have the key. I went to the kitchen and found a heavy screwdriver and a hammer. I didn't care about preserving the box. I cared about what was inside. I jammed the screwdriver into the latch and hit it with the hammer. Once, twice, the metal shrieked and gave way. I opened the lid. Inside, there were 3 things: a ledger book with a black cover, a flash drive, and a letter. The letter was addressed to A.S. I opened it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely read. Alice, if you are reading this, it means you found the loose board. You always were the observant one. This box contains the insurance. The ledger details the transactions for the last 10 years between Sable Ridge and the North Pine initiatives. The flash drive contains the audio recordings of the board meetings I attended. I wanted to burn it all down. Alice, but I couldn't do it while I was alive. They have leverage on me, old sins, but they don't have leverage on you. Read the ledger. Listen to the drive. But be warned, if Serena comes for everything, it means they did too. She is not just greedy. She is compromised. They own her. Do not trust the police in the city. Go to the feds if you have to, but only when you have the full picture. I am sorry I left you a war, but you are the only soldier I have. Dad, I stared at the letter. They own her. Serena wasn't the villain. She was a pawn, a wealthy, powerful, vicious pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. I put the letter back in the box. I picked up the ledger. I opened it to a random page. March 12, 2024. Transfer to Initiative 4. $200,000. Note: zoning approval expedited. April 4th, 2024. Transfer to Initiative 4. $150,000. Note: silence fee. Project Blue. It was a log of bribes. My father had been the bagman for a massive corruption scheme disguised as philanthropy. I closed the book. I felt sick. Suddenly, headlights swept across the living room wall. I froze. I was alone up here. No one was supposed to be here. I scrambled up. Grabbing the box, I ran to the window and peered through the blinds. A truck was coming up the driveway. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't Serena's Range Rover. It was a tow truck, and behind it, a dark sedan. I didn't wait. I shoved the box into my backpack. I grabbed my keys. I ran out the back door, toward the footpath that led down to the boathouse. I couldn't take my car. They would block the driveway. I ran into the dark, the rain soaking me instantly. I heard car doors slam. I heard voices. "Check the house. She's here." It was a man's voice. Deep. Aggressive. I reached the boathouse and slipped inside. I huddled in the corner, behind the old canoe, clutching my backpack to my chest. I waited. I heard footsteps on the gravel. I heard the front door of the house being kicked open. They weren't here to serve papers. They were here to take the box. I stayed in the boathouse for 3 hours, shivering, until I heard the engines start up and the cars drive away. When I finally crept back up to the house, my car was still there, but the tires were slashed, all 4 of them, and on the windshield, under the wiper blade, was a note. "This is a dangerous road. Alice, drive carefully." I didn't sleep. I walked 3 miles in the rain to the nearest gas station and called a mechanic. I didn't call the police. My father's letter had been clear. Do not trust the police in the city. I got the tires fixed and drove back to Marrowgate, the metal box in the trunk rattling with every bump. When I got to my apartment, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear had burned out, leaving something harder in its place. I called Diana. "We need to talk," I said. "I have the proof. Bring it to me," she said. "I will. But Diana?" "Yes? We are going to need more than a probate lawyer. We are going to need a bodyguard." The next week was a blur of legal violence. Serena's team dropped the pretense of politeness. They filed a motion for emergency discovery, demanding access to all my personal records. They wanted my medical history. They wanted my employment files. They wanted my emails from the last 10 years. Then the subpoenas started arriving for people I knew. My boss at the archives, my landlord, my ex-boyfriend from 5 years ago. They were building a dossier. They were trying to paint a picture of a woman who was unstable, financially desperate, and prone to fantasy. I sat in Diana's office as she read the list of demands. "They are trying to break you, Alice," she said. "They want you to feel naked. They want you to be so humiliated that you quit. They are asking for my therapy records, I said, looking at the document. From when my mother died. I was 12. It is standard cruelty, Diana said. We will object to it all, but some of it will stick. Let it stick. I said, I don't care. Diana looked at me over her glasses. You have changed. Alice, I found a box of bribes under the floorboards of my childhood home. Diana, I am done being polite. Good, she said, because we have a hearing tomorrow regarding the asset freeze. If we win, we keep the investigation open. If we lose, they lock everything down. The morning of the hearing. I was ready. I had the ledger in my bag. I wasn't going to reveal it yet. Diana said it was too early. We needed to verify the accounts first, but I wanted it close to me. I parked my car in a legal spot 2 blocks from the courthouse. I checked the signs. 2-hour parking, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. I put enough coins in the meter for 3 hours. I walked to the courthouse. I met Diana at the security checkpoint. We went upstairs to Department 402. The hearing was grueling. Serena's lawyers argued that I was dissipating assets. They claimed I had damaged the lake house during my visit. They claimed I was stealing family heirlooms. Diana fought back. She was brilliant. She argued that the damage was a loose floorboard and that no assets had been removed from the trust. The judge seemed inclined to agree with us. He was leaning forward, about to rule. Then, the bailiff approached the bench and whispered something. Judge Holloway frowned. He looked at me. Ms. Sanchez, he said. Yes, Your Honor. It has been brought to the court's attention that there is a disturbance involving your vehicle. My vehicle? Apparently, it is blocking a fire hydrant and has been towed. The tow operator reported suspicious contents in the back seat. I felt the blood drain from my face. I didn't park in front of a hydrant, and there was nothing in the back seat. The metal box was in my bag, but I had left a folder of copies in the car. Your Honor, I said, standing up, I parked legally. It is a distraction. Serena's lawyer interrupted. But it speaks to the respondent's erratic behavior. Who blocks a fire hydrant at a courthouse? I did not block a hydrant, I shouted. The judge banged his gavel. Order, Ms. Sanchez. You will deal with your vehicle, but this hearing is adjourned until 2 o'clock. And frankly, this chaotic behavior does not help your case for being a responsible steward of this estate. I stared at him. It was a setup, a petty, stupid setup designed to make me look irresponsible and flush me out of the courtroom. I grabbed my bag and ran out. I ran to the spot where I had parked. My car was gone. And there, standing on the sidewalk where my car had been, was a brand new, bright red fire hydrant. The concrete around the base was still wet. They had installed a fake hydrant, or they had moved a real one. It didn't matter. I stood there, staring at the wet cement. It wasn't just about delay. It was a message. We can move the world around you. We can change the rules while you are playing the game. I looked around the street. People were walking by, oblivious. Then I saw him, across the street, standing in the doorway of a coffee shop. The man in the black suit. He was holding a paper cup. He was watching me. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He slowly raised his cup in a mock toast. Then he turned and walked away. I stood on the curb, the smell of wet cement in my nose. They had towed my car. They had slashed my tires. They had threatened my reputation. But they had made one mistake. They thought this would make me stop. I took out my phone and called Diana. Diana, I said. Where are you? She asked. The judge is furious. I don't care about the judge. I said, I want you to hire the forensic accountant, the expensive one. Noah Breck? Diana asked. He costs $400 an hour. I don't care. I said, I want him to trace every dime in Sable Ridge. And Diana? Yes? I want to depose Serena. I want to put her under oath. Alice, that is declaring total war. I looked at the empty parking spot. Good. I said, I am ready to fire back. Noah Breck did not look like a wizard of forensic accounting. He looked like a man who had not slept since the mid-90s. His office was located in a converted warehouse district on the edge of the city, a space that smelled of burnt coffee and ozone from overheating server racks. He was 30 years old, wore a hoodie that had seen better days, and typed with a speed that was frankly unsettling. I sat on a folding chair across from his desk, watching him work. Diana had sent me here with the copies of the ledger I had found under the floorboards and the digital files from the flash drive. Noah had been silent for 40 minutes. Finally, he stopped typing and spun his chair around. "This is a mess," he said. "A good mess or a bad mess?" I asked. "A deliberate mess," Noah corrected. He pointed to one of his 3 monitors. "Your father was a smart man. Alice, he built Sable Ridge Holdings like a Russian nesting doll. You open one shell company, you find another, you open that one, you find a trust, you open the trust, you find a charitable initiative." "What is at the center?" I asked. "A drain," Noah said. He tapped the screen. "I have traced the transfers from the ledger you found, every month. Like clockwork. Money leaves Sable Ridge and goes into 4 specific accounts. They are listed as community initiatives attached to the North Pine Community Foundation." "That sounds legal." I said, "North Pine is a charity. It sounds legal." Noah agreed. "But look at the names. Initiative Alpha, Initiative Beta, Initiative Gamma, Initiative Delta. They are not projects, they are buckets. The money goes in, and it disappears. No overhead costs, no staff salaries, no project reports, just cash in, and then, poof." "How much?" I asked. "Over the last 10 years?" Noah rubbed his eyes. $14 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. $14 million. My father had been bleeding his own company dry. But here's the interesting part. Noah said. He pulled up a timeline graph. "See this spike? 2 years ago. The ownership structure of one of the subsidiaries, a company called Viridian Logistics, changed overnight. What happened? Your father moved the controlling shares of Viridian out of the General Family Trust and into a standalone entity solely owned by Sable Ridge." Noah explained, "and he did it quietly. He did not file a public announcement. He just buried it in the quarterly paperwork." "Why does that matter?" I asked. "Because Viridian is the cash cow," Noah said. "It is the only part of the empire that makes real liquid profit. By moving it into Sable Ridge, he effectively took it away from Serena before he even wrote the new will." I stared at the screen. Serena is claiming I manipulated him in the last 6 months of his life. "Exactly," Noah said, "but this transfer happened 2 years ago. You were not even talking to him then. This proves the will was not a sudden, medicated impulse. Alice, it was the final move in a chess game he had been playing for years. He was systematically isolating the assets so he could hand them to you in one clean package. He was protecting them from her," I whispered, "or from whoever is pulling her strings," Noah said. He leaned forward. "Because whoever is running those community initiatives at North Pine, they are not doing charity work. They are skimming, and your father knew it." The euphoria of Noah's discovery was short-lived. 2 days later, I walked into the conference room at Halston and Price for my deposition. The room was freezing. The air conditioning was set to a temperature designed to keep people awake and uncomfortable. A court reporter sat at the end of the table with her stenography machine. Serena was not there. Instead, Marcus Thorne sat across from me. He looked like a man who was carved out of expensive soap, smooth, slippery, and smelling faintly of chemicals. "Ms. Sanchez," Thorne began, his voice pleasant. "You claim you had no knowledge of your father's intention to change his will." "That is correct," I said. "And you claim you had very little contact with him over the last 3 years." "Yes." Thorne slid a piece of paper across the table. "Then, can you explain this email?" I picked it up. It was a printout of an email from my personal account. Dated 6 months ago, the subject line was, "Please help. Dad, I need the money. You know I do not ask for much, but I am desperate. If you do not help me, I do not know what I will do. Please, just this once." I stared at the paper. My hands started to shake. "I remember this email," I said, "but this is not the whole email." Thorne smiled. "It is printed directly from the server. Ms. Sanchez, I looked at Diana. She was frowning, reading the document over my shoulder. I wrote this email 4 years ago, I said, my voice rising. My car had broken down, and I needed $2,000 for a new transmission, and the date is wrong. This says it was sent last October. Thorne leaned back. Are you suggesting the timestamps are incorrect? I am suggesting this is manipulated. I said, and how do you have this? I never gave you access to my personal emails. We obtained it through a subpoena to the service provider regarding communications relevant to the decedent's mental state, Thorne said smoothly. It demonstrates a pattern. Ms. Sanchez, you were desperate for money. You pressured a dying man. It is a lie. I said, is it? Thorne produced another document. Here's a text message log. You asking about his medication schedule? You asking when the lawyers were coming? I never sent those texts. Ms. Sanchez, please lower your voice, Thorne said. We are just trying to get to the truth. You were estranged. You were broke. And suddenly, you are the sole beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar holding company. The narrative writes itself. I felt a wave of nausea. They were not just twisting the truth. They were rewriting my history. They had access to my digital life, and they were cutting and pasting pieces of me to build a monster. Diana placed a hand on my arm. Her grip was tight. My client reserves the right to authenticate these documents. Mr. Thorne, Diana said sharply, and we will be requesting the metadata for every single item you present. Thorne shrugged. Of course. We have nothing to hide. The deposition lasted 6 hours. He asked me about my mother. He asked me about my dating life. He asked me if I had ever used illegal drugs. He asked me if I hated my sister. No, I said, exhausted. I do not hate her. I pity her. Thorne paused. He looked at me for a long moment. Pity is a very expensive emotion. Ms. Sanchez, you might find it costs you more than you can afford. When we got back to Diana's office, she slammed the door so hard the framed diplomas on the wall rattled. They hacked you, she said. What? They did not get those emails from a subpoena, Diana said. I would have seen the motion. They got them because someone has your passwords, or because someone has access to a mirror of your father's server, and you emailed him. Serena, I said, she has his laptop. Diana paced the small room. It is worse than that. Alice, while you were getting grilled, I did some digging on Marcus Thorne. What about him? He is a shark. Yes, but sharks usually swim alone. Thorne is a partner at Vance and Sterling. Do you know who their biggest client is? I shook my head. The North Pine Community Foundation. Diana said. I froze. Thorne was outside counsel for the North Pine Board for 5 years. Diana continued. He handled their compliance audits. He handled their donor agreements. So he is not working for Serena. I said, he is working for the foundation. Diana said, Serena is the plaintiff, but North Pine is paying the bill. This is not a family dispute. Alice, this is a proxy war. They are using Serena to get the company back so they can bury whatever is in those accounts. Because if I keep the company, I see the fraud. I said, exactly. Diana sat down heavily. We are in trouble, Alice. We are not fighting a jealous sister. We are fighting an institution with endless resources and a very specific need to keep things quiet. That evening, I found an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of my rental car. I flinched when I saw it, remembering the slashed tires. But this was just a plain white envelope. Inside was a printed invitation card. The Skylark Diner, Booth 4, 8 p.m. A friend of your father. I looked around the parking lot. It was empty. I debated not going. It felt like a trap, but my father's letter echoed in my head. Trust the person who arrives with proof. The Skylark Diner was a chrome and neon relic on the highway, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and smelled of bacon grease. I arrived at 7:55. I wore a heavy coat and kept my hand on the pepper spray in my pocket. Booth 4 was in the back corner. It was empty. I sat down, facing the door. The waitress came over and poured me a cup of coffee without asking. Waiting for someone? She asked. I think so. I said. I waited. 8 o'clock came and went. 8:15. 8:30. No one approached the table. I felt foolish. It was a game. Another way to keep me off balance. I finished the coffee and signaled for the check. The waitress ripped a slip of paper from her pad and placed it on the table. "Honey, the gentleman who was here earlier paid for your coffee," she said. "He left this for you." She handed me a paper napkin. I unfolded it. Written in blue ink, in a precise, blocky hand, were 4 words: black suit, back row. I looked up. "Who was here?" I asked. "What did he look like?" "Generic," the waitress said with a shrug. "Suit, tie, quiet. He sat in that booth for an hour, drank a water, and left right before you walked in." I looked at the napkin again. Black suit, back row, the man in the courtroom, the man who had tapped his watch, the man across the street when my car was towed. He wasn't trying to meet me. He was trying to validate himself. He was telling me that he was the friend, and he was telling me that he was watching. He didn't show up because he couldn't be seen with me. Not yet. I crumpled the napkin and put it in my pocket. I left the diner, feeling a strange mixture of fear and reassurance. I wasn't alone. I had a ghost on my flank. The next morning, Serena called me. Not her lawyers. "Serena, meet me," she said. "Where?" "The Botanical Gardens. The Orchid House. Noon." She hung up. I called Diana. She advised against it. She said it was dangerous to meet without counsel. "I have to go," I said. She sounded different. She sounded rattled. The Orchid House was humid and silent. A glass cathedral filled with strange, alien flowers. Serena was standing by a display of rare purple blooms. She was wearing sunglasses. Even though it was overcast, she looked tired. The perfect skin was a little pale. The rigid posture was a little slumped. "Alice," she said. She didn't look at me. She stared at the flowers. "Serena, this has to end," she said. "It is getting out of control. The press is digging into things that have nothing to do with the will. They are asking questions about the family, about Dad's old partnerships. You started this." "Serena," I said, "you filed the contest. I did what I had to do," she snapped. She turned to me, taking off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I have a new offer," she said. I waited. "Keep the lake house," she said. "Keep the cash in the personal accounts, and I will set up an annuity for you. $100,000 a year. For life. That is a lot of money." I said cautiously, "It is freedom. Alice, you can quit your job. You can travel. You can do whatever you want. And in exchange, you sign the settlement. You relinquish Sable Ridge Holdings to the estate. And you sign the NDA. The NDA again. Why is the silence so expensive?" "Serena?" I asked. "Why is it worth millions of dollars to keep me from talking?" "Because you do not understand how the world works," she hissed. Her voice cracked. "You think Dad was a saint? You think that money just appeared? It is complicated. Alice, it relies on relationships, privacy. If you start poking holes in it, the whole thing collapses. Let it collapse." I said, "No." She grabbed my arm. Her grip was painful. "You cannot. There are people. There are agreements. If Sable Ridge is audited, if those files are made public." She stopped. She realized she had said too much. She let go of my arm and stepped back, smoothing her coat. "Just take the deal. Alice, please, for your own sake. The offer expires in 24 hours. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking rapidly on the stone path. I watched her go. She wasn't negotiating. She was pleading. She was afraid. Not of me. She was afraid of the people and the agreements. I went straight to Diana's office. "I need to see the addendum again," I said. Diana pulled the file. "Here." I read the text of the sealed document again. I had skimmed it before. Focused on the lake house instruction. But now I read the preamble. In the event of a challenge, regarding the compliance review of the misappropriated funds identified in the fiscal year 2023, misappropriated funds. My father had admitted it in writing. He had put it in the will, buried in legalese. He was flagging the crime. He wasn't just hiding the money from Serena. He was hiding the evidence of a crime inside the inheritance. If I accepted the inheritance, I became the guardian of the evidence. If Serena got it, she would destroy it. I looked at Diana. He was trying to turn himself in. I said, but he couldn't do it while he was alive. He needed me to do it for him. Diana nodded slowly. That fits. But Alice, if we prove fraud, the assets might be seized. You could inherit nothing. I don't care about the money. I said, I care about the fact that my sister is terrified of the people she's working with. I stood up. Call Noah. I said, tell him to look deeper. Tell him to look for anything that isn't a charity, anything that looks like a person. That night, Noah called me at 2 a.m. I found it. He said, his voice was hoarse. Found what? I mumbled. Sitting up in bed. The ghost in the machine, Noah said. I was looking at the transfers again. The $14 million to the initiatives. Most of it is washed. It goes into vendor accounts for consulting and logistics. But I found one recurring payment that is different. Different how? It goes to a shell company called Harbor Shield. Noah said, Harbor Shield? That sounds like a security firm. That is what I thought. Noah said, so I dug into the incorporation papers. It is not a security firm. It is a residential leasing entity. It pays rent on 3 properties, one in Montana, one in New Mexico, one in Maine. Rent? For who? I do not know, Noah said, but the payments are coded as protection and relocation expenses. I sat in the dark, clutching the phone. Relocation, protection. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was a witness protection program, privately funded. Victor Sanchez wasn't just paying bribes. He was hiding someone. Alice, Noah said, his voice dropping. Who was your father protecting? I don't know. I said, but I thought about the man in the black suit. I thought about the fear in Serena's eyes. I thought about the agreements. Maybe he wasn't protecting a person from the law. Maybe he was protecting a person from North Pine. Keep digging. Noah, I said, find out who lives in those houses. I hung up. I couldn't sleep. I got out of bed and went to the window. The street below was empty. But I knew the war had shifted. We weren't fighting over a bank account anymore. We were fighting over a life. I looked at the napkin on my nightstand. Black suit, back row. He knew. The man in the suit knew about Harbor Shield. That's why he was watching. I was the key. If I gave up, if I took Serena's deal, the money for Harbor Shield would stop. The rent wouldn't be paid. The protection would end. And whoever was hiding in Montana or Maine or New Mexico would be found. I realized then that my father hadn't just left me a fortune. He had left me a responsibility. He had left me a human life to guard. I went to my desk and took out a fresh sheet of paper. I wrote down Serena's offer. Lake house, annuity, silence. Then I took a red pen and drew a thick line through it. I wasn't going to be silent. I was going to scream. The courtroom in Department 402 had become a theater of cruelty. The air was stale, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, monotonous drone, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. We were in day 4 of the hearings regarding the preliminary injunction and the capacity arguments, and Serena's team was systematically dismantling the memory of our father. They called a medical expert to the stand, a doctor, Lawrence Sterling. He was a man with a soothing, radio-quality voice and a face that radiated trustworthy concern. He sat in the witness box, adjusted his rimless glasses, and looked at the judge with a practiced gravity. Doctor. Sterling, Marcus Thorne said, pacing in front of the witness stand, you reviewed the medical records of Victor Sanchez from the last 6 months of his life. Can you describe his condition? He was in significant decline. Doctor, Sterling said, the cancer had metastasized to the liver and the spine. The pain management regimen was aggressive. He was on high doses of opioids, specifically morphine and fentanyl patches. And what is the cognitive effect of such a regimen? Thorne asked. Confusion. Doctor, Sterling said. Disorientation, pliability. A patient in that state often struggles to distinguish between their own desires and the suggestions of those around them. They become highly susceptible to influence. especially if they are isolated. I sat at the respondents' table, my hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white. They were painting him as a senile, drug-addled invalid. They were erasing the sharp, terrified man who had written me that letter. Thorne turned to look at me. It was a theatrical turn, designed for the gallery. So, in your professional opinion, Doctor, would Victor Sanchez have possessed the testamentary capacity to completely restructure his estate and rewrite his will 3 weeks before his death? Doctor? Sterling shook his head. It is highly unlikely, in my opinion. He would have lacked the necessary cognitive coherence to understand the implications of such a complex decision. I looked at Serena. She was looking down at her hands, playing the part of the heartbroken daughter forced to reveal her father's weakness. But I saw the tension in her jaw. She wasn't sad. She was waiting. When it was Diana's turn to cross-examine, she stood up slowly. She didn't pace. She just leaned against the table. Doctor. Sterling, she said. Did you ever meet Victor Sanchez? No. The doctor said. I was retained to review the records. So you never spoke to him? Diana said. You never heard him speak. You never saw him interact with his staff. That is correct. Are you aware that on the day he signed the new will, he also signed a complex commercial lease agreement for a warehouse in the logistics district? Diana asked. An agreement that required him to initial 17 separate clauses regarding liability and zoning? Doctor, Sterling blinked. I was not aware of that specific document. And are you aware, Diana continued, her voice sharpening, that the notary public who witnessed the will signing has submitted an affidavit stating that Mr. Sanchez was joking with her about the weather and asked specific questions about the notary seal expiration date? Patients can have moments of lucidity. Doctor, Sterling said dismissively, it is called terminal rallying. It does not mean they are competent. Thank you. Doctor, Diana said. She sat down. It was a good point, but I could feel the weight of the room shifting. The narrative was sticky, old, sick, drugged, manipulated. It was a simple story, and courts loved simple stories. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the metal file box again. I needed to find him. I needed to find the father I remembered, not the ghost doctor Sterling had described. I pushed aside the ledger and the flash drive. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a rubber band, was a small leather-bound notebook. It was a moleskin, the black cover worn soft at the corners. I opened it. The entries were short. My father was not a diarist. He was a note-taker. He wrote in bullet points and fragments. January 12th. Pain is bad today. The pills make the room swim. But I have to stay sharp. The meeting with North Pine is on Thursday. I need to review the allocation reports. I turned the page. February 4th. Serena came by. She asked about the trust again. She looks at me like I'm already dead. She is measuring the drapes. I felt a chill. He saw it. He saw everything. I flipped forward to the final month. The handwriting was shakier. The ink pressed harder into the paper, as if he was fighting to control the pen. March 10th. They know I'm leaving. Thorne called me 3 times. He made a joke about protecting the legacy. It wasn't a joke. It was a threat. They will punish her if I don't keep it quiet. They will ruin her reputation before the first shovel hits the ground. I stared at the line. They will punish her. Was he talking about me or Serena? I read the next entry. Dated 3 days later, Alice is the only one who won't sell her soul for applause. I have to insulate her, give her the company, but hide the key. If she finds it, she finds it. If she doesn't, maybe she stays safe. I am sorry. Alice, I am so sorry. He wasn't confused. He was calculating. He was playing a high-stakes game of keep-away with his own life's work, trying to navigate a minefield while his body was failing him. I took a picture of the page with my phone and sent it to Diana. He was lucid. I typed, and he was threatened. The next morning, the war expanded. Diana filed a motion to compel discovery. She demanded the release of all communication between Serena Sanchez, Marcus Thorne, and the North Pine Community Foundation regarding the estate of Victor Sanchez. We were in the judge's chambers for this argument. It was a smaller, more intimate setting, but the tension was thicker. Judge Holloway sat behind his desk, looking through the motion. "Ms. Klein," he said, "this is a fishing expedition. You are asking for the internal communications of a charitable foundation that is not a party to this suit. They are a party, Your Honor," Diana argued. "The plaintiff's lead counsel, Mr. Thorne, was their outside counsel. The plaintiff herself sits on their advisory council, and we have evidence suggesting that the assets in dispute are inextricably linked to foundation transfers." Suddenly, the door to the chambers opened. 3 men walked in. They were not part of Serena's team. They wore charcoal suits that looked like armor. "Your Honor," the man in the center said, "I am independent counsel for the North Pine Community Foundation. We are intervening to assert our rights regarding donor privacy and institutional confidentiality." The judge looked up. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "not the doctor. This was a lawyer named Sterling. No relation. Likely. But the name felt like a curse. We object to this motion," the lawyer said. He placed a brief on the desk. "The North Pine Foundation manages the privacy of hundreds of high-net-worth donors. Opening our internal communications to the public record because of a family squabble would cause irreparable harm to our reputation and our ability to fundraise. We are asserting a privilege shield." "It is not a family squabble," Diana snapped. "It is a question of where $14 million went." "That is a matter for the IRS, not the probate court," the lawyer replied smoothly. "And Mr. Sanchez's donations were fully vetted." I looked at Serena. She was sitting in the corner of the room. She looked pale. She was staring at the North Pine lawyers with a look that I recognized. It was the look of a child who had invited a monster into the house and now realized it wouldn't leave. She was on the advisory council. I knew that. But as I watched her, I realized what that meant. If North Pine was skimming money through my father's company, Serena had to know, or at least, she had to have signed off on it. Her wealth, her status, her seat on the board, it was all built on this. If the truth came out, she wouldn't just lose the inheritance. She would face criminal liability. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting for her freedom. Judge Holloway rubbed his temples. "I am taking this under advisement," he said. "I will not grant the motion to compel today. But Mr. Sterling, if Ms. Klein can show a direct nexus between the estate assets and these specific transfers, I will pierce your shield. Do you understand?" "We understand." "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "but that nexus does not exist." They walked out. Serena followed them, her head down. She looked small. We went back to Diana's office. Noah Breck was waiting for us. He had circles under his eyes and a half-eaten sandwich on the desk. "They are lying," Noah said before we even sat down. "We know they are lying," Diana said, throwing her briefcase on the couch. "The problem is proving it before they bury us in paper." "No, I mean the nexus," Noah said. "I found it." He spun his laptop around. "I kept digging into the community initiatives," he said, "specifically Initiative 4. That's the one that gets the biggest monthly transfer, $80,000, every month." "And?" I asked. "I traced the vendor payments," Noah said. "Most of them go to that shell company, Harbor Shield. But about 30% of the money goes to a different entity, a consulting firm called Vantage Point Strategies. I don't know that name." I said, "You wouldn't." Noah said, "It is a single-member LLC registered in Delaware." But I cross-referenced the corporate officers with the North Pine board minutes. He pointed to a name on the screen. "Director, Julian Vane." "Who is Julian Vane?" I asked. "He is the vice president of operations for North Pine." Noah said, "And here is the kicker. He is the one who signed the approval for every single one of your father's donations." I stared at the screen. "So my father sends money to the foundation," Noah said. "The foundation sends it to Initiative 4. Initiative 4 sends it to Vantage Point Strategies. And Vantage Point Strategies is owned by the guy who approved the donation in the first place. It is a kickback loop," Diana said softly. "A classic wash," Your father was paying them to let him hide money. And Serena? I asked. Noah clicked a few keys. I looked at the advisory council meeting notes. Vantage Point Strategies is listed as a preferred vendor for the council's annual retreat and strategic planning sessions. Guess who chairs the strategic planning committee? Serena, I whispered. She signs the checks to Vantage Point, Noah said. I sat back in the chair. The room felt very small. This wasn't just my father. Serena was part of the machinery. She was helping them skim. Maybe she didn't know the full extent. Maybe she thought it was just consulting fees. But her signature was on the money. Alice, Diana said. Her voice was serious. I looked at her. You need to understand what this means. She said, if we use this, we are accusing a major charitable foundation and your sister of federal wire fraud and embezzlement. This stops being a civil case. This becomes a criminal investigation. I know. I said, do you? Diana asked. She leaned forward. Serena has resources. North Pine has armies. If we drop this bomb, they will detonate everything they have to stop you. They will sue you for defamation. They will drag this out for 5 years, 10 years. You will spend every dollar you have and every dollar you don't have. You will lose your job. You will lose your anonymity. You will be that woman for the rest of your life. She paused. Is it worth it? She asked. Is the truth worth your peace? I looked at the floor. I thought about my quiet apartment in Marrowgate. I thought about my job at the archives. I liked my life. I liked being invisible. But then I thought about the journal. Alice is the only one who won't sell her soul for applause. He believed in me. He believed I was strong enough to hold the line. And I thought about the man in the black suit. I thought about the people in Montana and Maine who were being protected by the Harbor Shield money. If North Pine won, they would clean the accounts. They would stop the payments. I looked at Diana. I don't have peace anymore. Diana, I said, they took it when they towed my car. They took it when they slashed my tires. The only way out is through. Diana sighed. She looked terrified and thrilled at the same time. Okay, she said. Then let's burn it down. I needed more leverage. I needed to know exactly what my father had tried to do before he died. I called the bakery where Mara Ellison worked. She didn't answer. I drove out there, but she wasn't on the schedule. I found her address in an online directory. It was a small townhouse in a subdivision near the airport. I knocked on the door. It took a long time for her to answer. When she did, she kept the chain on. Go away. Alice, she said, please, I know about Julian Vane. I said, Mara froze. Her face went white. I know about Vantage Point. I said, I know about the kickbacks. I know my father was paying them off. She closed the door. I heard the chain slide off. She opened the door and pulled me inside. Are you crazy? She hissed. Do not say that name out loud. They are already coming for me. Mara, I said, I need to know the rest. You said he tried to resign. He did, she said. She walked to the window and peered through the blinds. He went to the board meeting in February. He had a resignation letter typed up. He told them he was liquidating Sable Ridge and stopping the payments. And they told him that if he stopped the payments, they would release the file on Harbor Shield, she said. They told him they would expose the people he was protecting. They used his conscience against him. Who are the people? Mara? I don't know, she said. I swear. He never wrote it down. But he had a meeting, a week after the board meeting. He didn't put it on his official calendar. He wrote it in his pocket diary. She went to a drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a small scrap of paper. It was a photocopy of a calendar page. She handed it to me. February 20th, 1400 hours, the glass block. Suite 500. There was a note scribbled in the margin in my father's handwriting. He said if anything happened, you'd know it mattered. Who is he? I asked. I don't know, Mara said. But your father came back from that meeting looking different. Different how? Calm, she said, like he had made a decision. That was the day he called Arthur Price to change the will. I looked at the address, the glass block. It was an office building in the financial district, not a high-profile one, a quiet one. "Thank you." "Mara," I said. She grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold. "Alice," she said, "be careful. Julian Vane is not a businessman. He is a fixer." I drove to the glass block. It was a nondescript building of dark reflective glass, sitting on a corner that seemed to consist mostly of parking garages and courier depots. I walked into the lobby. It was empty except for a security guard behind a high stone desk. "Can I help you?" the guard asked. He didn't smile. "I am looking for Suite 500. I said. The guard looked at a list. "There is no Suite 500 listed for public access. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "I am looking for information about a tenant. We don't give out tenant information." He said, "You need to leave." "But my father had a meeting here." I said, "Victor Sanchez." The guard's eyes flickered. It was a tiny reaction, but it was there. Recognition and wariness. "Mr. Sanchez is deceased," the guard said. "Please leave, ma'am, or I will call the police." I turned and walked out. I stood on the sidewalk, frustrated. It was a dead end. I looked up at the building. The windows were dark. It looked like a monolith. Then I looked across the street. There was a bus stop bench, and sitting on the bench, reading a newspaper, was a man. He wore a black suit. He wasn't looking at the paper. He was looking at me. It was the same man. The man from the court. The man from the diner. The man from the towing incident. He sat perfectly still. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just watched. I looked at him, and then I looked back at the building. Suite 500. He wasn't guarding me. He was guarding the building. Or maybe he was guarding what was inside Suite 500. Trust the person who arrives with proof. He was the proof. His presence was the confirmation. My father had gone to see him, or the agency he worked for. Noah had said Harbor Shield looked like witness protection. If my father went to the feds, or something like the feds, before he died, maybe he had made a deal. Maybe the will wasn't just a transfer of assets. Maybe it was a signal. I walked toward the man. He stood up immediately. He folded his newspaper. He shook his head once, a sharp, imperceptible movement. "Don't come closer." He turned and walked away down the street, disappearing into the pedestrian traffic. I didn't follow him. I understood the rules now. He couldn't make contact. Not yet. I got back in my car. My phone pinged. It was an email. I didn't recognize the sender. The address was a string of random numbers and letters, suspicious link removed. I opened it. The subject line was blank. The body of the email was 2 sentences. "I cannot contact you directly. Stay in the case. Do not sign anything tomorrow." I stared at the screen. Tomorrow. Tomorrow was the final hearing for the preliminary arguments. The judge was expected to rule on whether to freeze the assets indefinitely or dismiss Serena's contest, and Serena had told me her offer expired in 24 hours. They were converging. The pressure was peaking. "Do not sign anything." I typed a reply. "Who are you?" I hit send. The email bounced back immediately. "Address not found." I put the phone down. I looked at the glass block one last time in the rearview mirror. I was terrified. I was exhausted. I was out of my depth, but I wasn't signing anything. I drove home to Marrowgate. I checked the locks on my door. I put a chair under the handle. I sat in the dark and waited for the morning. The morning of the hearing arrived with the brutal precision of an execution. I woke up at 5 in the morning, my stomach churning with a nausea that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the notification blinking on my phone screen. The leak had dropped at midnight. It was a masterclass in character assassination, published on a reputable city news site under the headline, "The Troubled History of the Sanchez Estate." I sat on the edge of my bed, the room cold and gray, and read the words that Serena's team had fed to the press. They did not call me evil. That would have been too clumsy. Instead, they called me difficult. They cited anonymous family friends who claimed I had always been emotionally fragile and prone to episodes of paranoia. They painted a picture of a woman who had cut herself off from a loving family out of spite, only to return when the smell of money was in the air. Alice Sanchez has struggled for years to find her footing. The article read, her father supported her quietly from a distance, fearful that direct contact would trigger her volatility. It was a lie so elegant, it was almost beautiful. It took my silence, my independence, and my desire for privacy, and twisted them into symptoms of mental illness. I put the phone down. My hands were steady. A week ago, this would have broken me. I would have cried. I would have called Diana in a panic, begging her to fix it. But I was not that Alice anymore. I was the Alice who had broken open a floorboard with a hammer. I was the Alice who had found the ledger. I took a shower. I put on my best suit, a dark charcoal wool that made me feel armored. I drank black coffee. Then I drove to the courthouse. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. At 9, Diana met me in the lobby. She looked furious. You saw the article. She said, I saw it. It is jury tampering without a jury. Diana spat. They are trying to poison the judge's perception of you before you even take the stand, and they are trying to scare you into taking the deal. They want a meeting. I said, it was not a question. They do. Diana confirmed. 5 minutes. The conference room on the 3rd floor. Thorne called me at 6 this morning. He said it is the final offer. Let us go hear it. I said. We walked up the stairs. The courthouse was buzzing with the morning rush. Lawyers and clients swirling in a dance of misery and billable hours. The conference room was small and airless. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the table. Serena sat next to him. She looked worse than she had at the Orchid House. Her skin was the color of old parchment. Her eyes were dark hollows. She was tapping her fingers on the table in a rhythm that was frantic and uneven. Sit down, Thorne said. He did not smile today. We sat. Here's the reality, Thorne said, sliding a document across the table. The judge is going to rule today or tomorrow. If he rules for us, the assets are frozen indefinitely while we litigate capacity. That could take 5 years. You will be bankrupt in 6 months. I looked at the document. It was a check. $1 million, a cashier's check, certified funds, immediate. Take it, Serena said. Her voice was brittle. Just take it. Alice, $1 million, Thorne said. And the lake house. You walk away today. You sign the waiver. You sign the NDA. You never speak the name Sable Ridge again. I looked at the check. It was more money than I would earn in 20 years at the archives. It was safety. It was a new life. Then I looked at Serena. Why are you shaking? I asked. I am not shaking, she snapped. You are terrified. I said, you are not offering me this because you want to be generous. You are offering it because you are out of time. Thorne leaned forward. This is not a therapy session. Ms. Sanchez, this is a business transaction. It is hush money. I said, it is a settlement. Thorne corrected. And it expires the moment you walk out that door. If you go into that courtroom, the offer is 0. We will destroy you. We will make sure the public believes every word of that article. You will be the crazy daughter who tried to rob her dead father. I looked at the check again. I thought about the email from the night before. Do not sign anything tomorrow. I thought about the man in the black suit. I thought about the people in Montana and Maine, living in houses paid for by the Harbor Shield account. If I signed this, I was selling them out. I was selling my father out. I stood up. No, I said. Serena made a sound like she had been punched. Alice, please, you do not know what you are doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I said, I am declining your offer. Thorne's face hardened. He picked up the check and tore it in half. Then God help you, he said, because we will not. I turned and walked out. My legs felt like lead. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt physically sick, a wave of nausea rolling through me. But underneath the fear, there was something else, a cold, heavy anchor. My father had trusted me. He had left me the war because he knew I was the only one who would not surrender. I walked down the hall to Department 402. The courtroom was packed. The article had done its job. The gallery was full of reporters and curious onlookers. I saw the sketch artist sharpening her pencils. We took our seats. Judge Holloway entered. He looked annoyed. He looked like a man who had read the morning news and knew exactly what game was being played. "All right," the judge said, sitting down. "We are here to determine the preliminary status of the assets and the validity of the contest. I have read the briefs, I have read the affidavits, and I have read the gossip columns." He looked pointedly at Thorne. "Let us stick to the law today." "Counsel." Diana stood up. She was magnificent. She didn't use flowery language. She used facts. "Your Honor," she said, "the question of capacity is a smokescreen. Victor Sanchez was a businessman who executed complex commercial contracts on the same day he signed his will. We have submitted the notary logs. We have submitted the witness statements. The plaintiff's entire argument rests on a retroactive diagnosis by a doctor who never met the patient." Thorne stood up. He was smooth, polished, indignant. "Your Honor, the medical evidence is clear. The opioids were sufficient to cause significant cognitive impairment, and the sudden, radical change in the estate plan is classic evidence of undue influence. Alice Sanchez was estranged. She was desperate. She took advantage of a dying man." The judge listened, his face unreadable. He made notes. He asked sharp questions. He seemed impatient with Thorne's rhetoric, cutting him off twice when he drifted into emotional appeals. "Get to the evidence." "Mr. Thorne," the judge snapped, "I do not care about family feelings. I care about legal standing." Then, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A team of lawyers walked in, 3 of them. They moved with the synchronized arrogance of people who charged $1,000 an hour. It was the team from North Pine. "Your Honor," the lead attorney said, "we have an emergency motion to intervene." Judge Holloway sighed. "Mr. Sterling, you are interrupting a probate hearing. This affects the corpus of the estate." "Your Honor," Sterling said. He walked to the bench and handed a thick document to the clerk. "The North Pine Community Foundation asserts a claim of constructive trust over the assets held by Sable Ridge Holdings," Sterling announced. The room went silent. "Constructive trust?" the judge asked. "Explain." Sterling adjusted his cuffs. "We have evidence that Victor Sanchez pledged the assets of Sable Ridge to the foundation 5 years ago as part of a donor intent agreement. The transfer of these assets to his daughter in the new will is a violation of that prior contract. The assets do not belong to the estate. They belong to the foundation." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were claiming he didn't even own the company. They were trying to bypass the will entirely. If the judge agreed, the will didn't matter. The money would go straight to North Pine. Diana jumped up. "Objection. Your Honor, this is an ambush. We have seen no evidence of such a pledge. It was a verbal pledge confirmed by consistent conduct," Sterling said smoothly. "The pattern of donations, the $14 million over 10 years, establishes the intent." The judge looked at the document. He looked at Diana. He looked at Thorne. Thorne did not look surprised. He looked relieved. This was the plan. If Serena couldn't win the will contest, North Pine would step in and seize the assets directly. They didn't care who won. As long as I lost, as long as the book stayed closed, I request a recess to review this motion." Diana said. Her voice was tight. "Granted," the judge said. 30 minutes. We retreated to the hallway. Diana was vibrating with anger. "They are lying," she hissed. "A verbal pledge? For a holding company? It is nonsense. It violates the statute of frauds. They know it won't hold up at trial." "Then why do it?" I asked. "To freeze you," she said. "To muddy the water so deep the judge has no choice but to lock everything down while we fight about jurisdiction. It is a delay tactic, but it is a dangerous one." Noah Breck appeared at my elbow. He was holding his phone. "Alice," he said, "look at this." I looked at the screen. It was a spreadsheet. I cross-referenced the dates. Noah said, "The dates of the verbal pledge they are claiming? 5 years ago?" "Yes. That was the same week the North Pine board voted to approve a massive compensation package for their executive director." Noah said, "And it is the same week that Julian Vane bought a $3 million vacation home in Aspen. So, So the money from Sable Ridge didn't go to the pledge. Noah said, it went to fund the bonuses. I found an internal memo from the Foundation's Finance Committee. It references Sable Ridge liquidity as a source for executive retention. They were using my father's company as a piggy bank. I whispered, and now they are trying to steal the piggy bank to hide the fact that they broke it. Noah said, it was fraud, massive, institutional fraud, and they were using the court to cover it up. I looked down the hallway. Serena was standing near the water fountain. Her lawyers were huddled with the North Pine team, whispering. She was alone for a second. I walked over to her. Diana called my name, but I ignored her. Serena saw me coming. She stiffened. You knew. I said. She looked around. Keep your voice down. You knew about the motion. I said. You knew they were going to claim the assets. You were never going to get the money. Serena. They were just using you to keep me busy while they prepared the theft. Serena looked at me. Her eyes were wet. You do not understand, she whispered. It is not about the money. Then what is it about? She stepped closer. Her breath smelled of mints and terror. You are going to get people hurt. Alice. I froze. What people? I asked. She shook her head. Stop digging. Just stop. You think this is a game? You think this is some legal drama you can win? These people, they do not lose, and they do not forgive. She grabbed my wrist. Her fingers dug into my skin. If you expose Harbor Shield, she hissed, the protection ends. Do you understand? The protection ends. She let go and stepped back, looking horrified that she had said so much. I stared at her. She wasn't talking about herself. She wasn't talking about the board members. She was talking about the people in the houses. You know who they are. I said. Serena looked at the floor. I am sorry. Alice, I am so sorry. She turned and walked back to her lawyers, wiping her eyes. I stood there, stunned. Serena wasn't the villain. She was a hostage. She had been coerced into this contest, coerced into the lies, because she knew what would happen if the money stopped flowing. My father hadn't just left me a company. He had left me a standoff. I turned to go back to the courtroom, and then I saw him. The security line at the entrance of the courthouse was crowded. People were taking off belts, putting bags on the conveyor belt. But one man moved through it with a different kind of energy. He wore a black suit, a white shirt, a dark tie. He placed a leather badge wallet in the plastic bin. He walked through the metal detector. He didn't beep. He picked up his wallet. He didn't look around. He didn't look lost. He looked like a predator entering a familiar hunting ground. He walked toward the elevators. He wasn't coming to the third floor. He was going up. To the judge's chambers level? Or maybe to the clerk's office? I watched him until the elevator doors closed. The man in the black suit, the man who had been watching me for weeks, the man who had told me not to sign. He was here, inside the building. I felt a surge of adrenaline. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was making a move. I ran back to Diana. We need to go back in. I said, why? The recess isn't over. Something is happening. I said, we walked back into the courtroom. The air felt heavy, charged with static. The North Pine lawyers were already seated, looking smug. Thorne was checking his watch. Judge Holloway returned to the bench. Please be seated, the judge said. He looked at the North Pine motion. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, this motion is aggressive. You are asking me to set aside a valid will based on a claim of an oral contract for millions of dollars in assets. The law supports it. Your Honor, Sterling said, if the donor intent is clear. The judge frowned. He looked ready to argue, but before he could speak, the double doors at the back of the courtroom opened again. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a reporter. It was the man in the black suit. He walked into the room. He didn't bow. He didn't apologize for being late. He walked straight down the center aisle, past the gallery, past the bar. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his belt. Sir, you cannot approach the bench. The man didn't stop. He reached into his jacket pocket. The bailiff tensed. The man pulled out a leather credential case and flipped it open. Federal agent, he said. His voice was calm, carrying to every corner of the room. I have an urgent filing for the court regarding the matter of estate of Sanchez. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. Judge Holloway peered over his glasses. Agent? Which agency? The man handed the credentials to the bailiff, who looked at them, widened his eyes, and handed them up to the judge. The judge looked at the badge, then he looked at the man. Department of Justice. The judge said, Organized Crime and Public Corruption Unit. Yes, Your Honor. The man said, Special Agent David Kincaid, Sterling, the North Pine lawyer, stood up. His smugness had vanished. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Sit down. Counsel, the judge barked. Agent Kincaid? The judge said, Why are you interrupting my proceedings? Because, Your Honor, Kincaid said. Turning to look at the room, he looked at Thorne, he looked at Serena. Finally, his eyes landed on me. Because the assets currently being debated in this courtroom are subject to an active federal investigation regarding money laundering, wire fraud, and the protection of federal witnesses, he placed a thick envelope on the judge's bench. We are formally requesting a stay of all probate proceedings, Kincaid said, and we are moving to unseal the records of the North Pine Community Foundation immediately. I looked at Serena. She wasn't looking at the agent. She was looking at the table, her face buried in her hands. She knew. She had always known. I looked at Diana. Her mouth was open, and then I looked at Agent Kincaid. He gave me the smallest, almost invisible nod. Trust the person who arrives with proof. He had arrived. The judge opened the envelope. He read the first page. His eyebrows shot up. This court is in recess, the judge announced, his voice shaking slightly. Counsel for all parties, and Agent Kincaid, into my chambers. Now, he banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Pandemonium broke out in the gallery. Reporters were shouting questions. Lawyers were scrambling. I sat still. The noise washed over me. The chaos was deafening, but I felt a strange, quiet clarity. The secret wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about greed. It was about survival. And for the first time since my father died, I knew I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was the witness, and the trial was just beginning. The recess lasted exactly 24 hours, when we returned to the courthouse for the final hearing day. The atmosphere had shifted from a civil dispute to something resembling a public execution. The hallways were choked with reporters. The gallery in Department 402 was standing room only. The air conditioning struggled against the body heat, leaving the room heavy and smelling of damp wool and nervous sweat. I took my seat beside Diana. She looked calm, but her hand was gripping her pen so hard the plastic barrel was bending. Do not look back, she whispered. I looked back. In the back row, behind the sketch artists and the bloggers, sat 3 men. They were not wearing the flashy suits of high-priced litigators. They wore dark gray, nondescript suits. They sat with perfect posture, their hands folded in their laps. It was the board members from North Pine. Julian Vane was in the center. He met my eyes for a second. His face was a blank mask, but his eyes were dead. He looked like a shark waiting for a seal to slip off the ice. They were here to ensure the silence held. They were here to make sure Serena closed the deal. Judge Holloway entered the courtroom. He looked exhausted. The lines around his mouth were deeper than they had been yesterday. He sat down and arranged his robes with deliberate slowness. We are back on the record, the judge said. The court has reviewed the preliminary motions in chambers. However, given the gravity of the claims regarding the asset pledge, I am allowing one final round of testimony before I issue a ruling on the estate freeze. He looked at Serena's table. Mr. Thorne, call your witness. Thorne stood up. He looked confident, but there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. We call Serena Sanchez to the stand. Serena stood up. She wore a white suit today. It was a strategic choice. It made her look innocent, angelic, a beacon of purity in a room full of mud. She walked to the witness box and took the oath. Thorne walked her through the soft questions first. She talked about our childhood. She talked about our father's generosity. She cried, just a little, when she described his final days. It was a polished performance, honed by years of board meetings and charity galas. Serena, Thorne said gently, why are you contesting this will? Is it about the money? Serena looked at the judge. No, absolutely not. I have my own money. This is about protecting my father's legacy. He built Sable Ridge to be an engine for good. He wanted it to support the community. She paused, wiping her eye with a tissue. My sister, Alice. She has been distant for a long time. She does not understand the complexity of these assets. She sees a bank account. I see a responsibility. If the company falls into the wrong hands, the charitable work stops. The initiatives die. I cannot let that happen. It was convincing. If I did not know about the kickbacks, if I did not know about Harbor Shield, I would have believed her. She sounded like the responsible older sister trying to save the family farm from the prodigal child. Thorne sat down. Your witness. Diana stood up. She did not bring a notepad. She walked to the podium and rested her hands on the wood. Ms. Sanchez, Diana said, you speak very passionately about the charitable initiatives. I care about them deeply, Serena said. Specifically, Diana said, you are on the advisory council for the North Pine Community Foundation, correct? Yes, and in that role, you review the vendor contracts for the various initiatives funded by your father's company. I review the broad strategy, Serena said, her voice tightening. I do not get involved in the day-to-day accounting, but you signed the checks, Diana said. She held up a piece of paper. This is a check for $80,000 to Vantage Point Strategies. Your signature is on the bottom line. Serena hesitated. I sign hundreds of checks a month. Do you know who owns Vantage Point Strategies? Diana asked. No. As I said, I rely on our compliance team. Diana stepped closer. Even if the owner is Julian Vane, the vice president of the very foundation you advise? Objection, Thorne shouted. Jumping up. Relevance. Sustained, the judge said. Move on. Ms. Klein. Diana lowered the paper. Let us talk about the will, Diana said. You claim your father was confused. You claim he was manipulated. He was, Serena said. Then why? Diana asked. Did you send him an email 2 days before he died, begging him not to, and I quote, burn the bridge with the friends who keep us safe? Serena froze. I was speaking metaphorically. Were you? Diana asked. Or were you warning him? Who are the friends? Serena? Who keeps you safe? Serena looked at the back of the room. She looked at Julian Vane. I was talking about his reputation. Serena whispered. Diana waited. The silence stretched out, thin and taut. I have no further questions, Diana said. Serena stood up to leave the box. She looked shaken. The white suit didn't look like armor anymore. It looked like a surrender flag. She walked back to her table. Thorne whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. She just stared at the table. Judge Holloway cleared his throat. If there are no further witnesses, he said, I am prepared to issue my ruling on the preliminary injunction. The room went quiet. This was it. If he ruled for Serena, the assets would be locked. The investigation would be suffocated before it could breathe. I held my breath. And then, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. It wasn't a sudden bang. It was a slow, heavy creak that made everyone turn around. A man walked in. He was wearing a black suit, a crisp white shirt, a dark tie. He carried a thin leather portfolio under his arm. He did not look like he was in a hurry. He moved with a terrifying, deliberate calm. He walked past the rows of reporters. He walked past the North Pine board members, who stiffened as he passed them. He walked through the gate that separated the gallery from the well of the court. The bailiff stepped forward. Sir, the court is in session. You cannot be back here. The man didn't stop. He walked straight to the clerk's desk. He placed a plastic packet on the wood. Then he turned to the judge. Good morning, Your Honor, he said. His voice was a deep baritone that carried to the back of the room without a microphone. I apologize for the interruption. My name is David Kincaid. I am requesting to be heard on an emergency basis regarding federal case number 792. Judge Holloway looked at the man. He looked at the packet on the clerk's desk. The bailiff handed the packet up to the judge. Holloway opened it. He scanned the credentials inside. He looked at the gold badge encased in leather. The judge's face changed. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a sharp, alert intensity. "Agent Kincaid," the judge said, "you are cutting it close. I operate on a strict timeline. Your Honor." Kincaid said. Thorne stood up. "Your Honor." "Who is this?" "We are in the middle of a ruling." "Sit down." "Mr. Thorne," the judge snapped. "Agent Kincaid," the judge said, "please state your business for the record." Kincaid turned. He looked at the room. He looked at Julian Vane in the back row. Vane's face had gone the color of ash. Then Kincaid looked at Serena. "I am a special agent with the Department of Justice, Oversight and Public Corruption Unit." Kincaid stated, "I am here to present evidence connected to a multi-year investigation into financial crimes that overlap with the assets of the Sanchez estate." Thorne was sputtering. "This is absurd. What crimes?" Kincaid opened his portfolio. He pulled out a stack of documents. "Wire fraud." Kincaid said calmly, "money laundering, and the systemic embezzlement of charitable funds." He walked to the evidence table and placed the documents down. "Your Honor," Kincaid continued, "the plaintiff, Serena Sanchez, has argued that her father, Victor Sanchez, was mentally incapacitated and manipulated into changing his will. The government is here to correct the record." He held up a document. It was a sworn affidavit. Victor Sanchez was not incapacitated. Kincaid said, "For the last 18 months of his life, Victor Sanchez was a cooperating witness for the federal government." The sound in the courtroom died. It didn't taper off. It was sucked out of the room instantly. I stared at Kincaid. My father, a cooperating witness. He wasn't just hiding the truth. He was recording it. Kincaid continued, his voice relentless. "Mr. Sanchez approached our office 2 years ago." Kincaid said he had discovered that the North Pine Community Foundation was using his holding company, Sable Ridge, to launder kickbacks for construction contracts and political bribes. When he attempted to stop the transfers, he was threatened. "Threatened by whom?" the judge asked. "By the leadership of the foundation," Kincaid said. "Specifically, they threatened to expose the existence of the Harbor Shield Initiative." "What is Harbor Shield?" the judge asked. Kincaid paused. He looked at me. "It is a private funding mechanism Victor Sanchez established to pay for the housing and relocation of 3 families." Kincaid said, "Families of whistleblowers who were in danger. It was not a crime. Your Honor, it was a philanthropy, but because it was secret, the foundation used it as leverage for blackmail." He turned to Serena. "The foundation pressured Mr. Sanchez to maintain the flow of illicit funds," Kincaid said. "When he refused, they threatened to destroy his family. That is why he changed his will. He was not being manipulated by his daughter Alice. He was protecting the evidence by placing it in the one pair of hands he knew would not wash it clean." Thorne looked like he was having a stroke. "Your Honor, this is hearsay." "It is not hearsay," Kincaid said. "We have the tapes." He pointed to the evidence table. "Mr. Sanchez wore a wire for his last 4 meetings with the North Pine Board. We have audio recordings of Julian Vane instructing him to hide the assets. And we have audio of the pressure campaign directed at his family." Kincaid turned fully toward Serena now. "And that brings us to the contest." Kincaid said, "The government asserts that the contest of the will was not a genuine legal dispute. It was a containment strategy. The foundation knew that if Alice Sanchez audited the books, the scheme would be exposed. They needed Serena Sanchez to regain control of the company to scrub the servers." Serena let out a sound. It was a low, wounded moan. "Serena Sanchez," Kincaid said, his voice softer now. "You were told that if you didn't get the company back, the friends who keep you safe would stop being friendly. Is that correct?" Serena stood up. She was trembling so hard the table shook. She looked at Julian Vane in the back row. Vane was already standing up, moving toward the exit. 2 marshals who had entered quietly with Kincaid stepped in front of the doors, blocking his path. Serena looked at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified, and filled with a terrible, crushing relief. "I didn't know about the wire," she whispered. Her voice was picked up by the microphone. "I didn't know he was working with you." "Ms. Sanchez?" the judge asked. "Is Agent Kincaid telling the truth?" Serena looked at Thorne. Thorne was staring at his shoes, distancing himself from the blast radius. "Yes," she said. She sank back into her chair. They told me Alice would ruin everything. They told me she didn't understand the balance. They said if the money stopped, the people in the houses would be found." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to protect them. Alice," she sobbed. "I didn't want the money. I just wanted them to leave us alone. I was trying to protect the legacy. It wasn't a confession of greed. It was a confession of cowardice. She hadn't been defending the legacy. She had been defending her own captivity. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, terrified that if she stopped feeding the beast, it would eat her." Kincaid turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the Department of Justice moves to seize the records of the North Pine Community Foundation and to place the assets of Sable Ridge Holdings under temporary federal receivership pending the outcome of the criminal investigation." Judge Holloway sat back. He took off his glasses. He looked at the chaos in his courtroom. "Motion granted." The judge said, "The probate ruling is stayed. The contest is dismissed with prejudice." He looked at the North Pine lawyers. "And Mr. Sterling?" The judge's voice was ice cold. "I suggest you and your clients do not leave the building. I believe the marshals have some questions for you." He banged the gavel. "Court is adjourned." The next hour was a blur. The marshals arrested Julian Vane in the hallway. The reporters went into a feeding frenzy. Serena was escorted out a side door by her legal team, looking small and broken. I sat at the table with Diana. We didn't speak. We just watched the machinery of justice grind into gear. It was loud, messy, and violent. Finally, the room cleared out. Diana packed up her briefcase. "You won," she said. She didn't smile. "Did I?" I asked. "You kept the promise," she said. "You held the line." She squeezed my shoulder and walked out, leaving me alone in the well of the court. "Excuse me, Ms. Sanchez." I turned. Agent Kincaid was standing there. Up close. He looked older. He had tired eyes and a scar on his chin. "Agent Kincaid." I said, "Call me David," he said. He sat on the edge of the table. He didn't look like a Fed anymore. He looked like a guy who had just finished a very long shift. "Your father was a brave man." "Alice," he said, "he didn't start out that way. He made mistakes. He got involved with bad people because it was easy and profitable. But when he saw the cost, he tried to fix it. He left me a mess." I said. "He left you a choice," Kincaid corrected. "He knew he couldn't finish it. He knew he was dying. He needed someone who wasn't compromised, someone who hadn't taken the money." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Here is the situation," he said. "The investigation is going public. It is going to be ugly. The press will camp out on your lawn. You will be deposed a dozen times. Your life in Marrowgate is over. I know." I said, or Kincaid said. He held up a hand. "There is another option. The government can settle the estate quietly. We can absorb Sable Ridge into the asset forfeiture program. We can pay you a settlement, a clean $2 million. We give you a new identity. We move you to a different state. You disappear." I looked at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because you are a civilian," he said. "You didn't sign up for this war. You did your part. You delivered the evidence. You can walk away now." I thought about it. I thought about a house by the ocean, a new name, no reporters, no Serena, no North Pine, just peace. It was tempting. It was so incredibly tempting. But then I thought about the man in the black suit standing across the street from the diner. I thought about the envelope on my windshield. I thought about the people in the houses who needed Harbor Shield. If I disappear, I asked, what happens to the Harbor Shield families? Kincaid hesitated. "The government will assess their needs, but funding is bureaucratic. It might take time to reapprove their protection." "And in that time?" I asked. Kincaid didn't answer. He didn't have to. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I am not a civilian. Agent Kincaid. I said, I am the daughter of Victor Sanchez, and I am the owner of Sable Ridge Holdings. He looked at me. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. So no new identity? He asked. No. I said, my name is Alice Sanchez, and I am staying right here. I walked past him, toward the double doors. Where are you going? He called after me. I stopped and looked back. I am going to the archives. I said, I have a lot of files to organize. I pushed open the doors and walked out into the hallway. The flashbulbs popped. The reporters shouted my name. The noise was a physical wall. Alice! Alice! Over here! I didn't look down. I didn't hide my face. I walked straight into the light. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Alice Sanchez and her battle for the truth. It is a story about the quiet power of integrity and the hidden wars that families fight behind closed doors. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and tell me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. Are you in New York? London? Tokyo? Let me know. And if you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. I have many more tales of justice, betrayal, and redemption coming soon. Share your thoughts in the comments in English. Did Alice make the right choice? Would you have taken the settlement and disappeared? I read every comment, and I can't wait to hear your perspective. Until next time, keep watching the shadows.